The Empire's reckoning. The Grand Council chamber of the mixed Thali star empire stretched upward like the throat of some ancient beast, its vaulted ceiling lost in shadow, despite the constellation of bioluminescent crystals suspended overhead. Emperor Tikal sat upon the resonance throne, his chitinous form casting fragmented reflections across the polished obsidian floor. Around him, in concentric rings of descending authority, sat the minds that guided an empire spanning 47 star systems. Today, they would discuss humanity. The Terran Alliance, Tikal began, his voice carrying the harmonic undertones that marked imperial decree, has demonstrated technological parity with our outer colonial forces. Their expansion into the Kepler corridor places them within 3 jumps of our industrial core worlds. Strategic doctrine suggests integration or elimination. He paused, mandibles clicking thoughtfully. I prefer integration. Director Chak, you have studied them. Explain why your report recommends neither. The intelligence director rose from his position in the third ring, his smaller frame moving with predatory grace. Chak had survived 30 years in galactic intelligence by understanding what others missed. The datapad in his clawed hand felt heavier than it should. Your Radiance, Honored Council, Chak began. I submit that our strategic framework is inadequate when applied to humanity. For the past 7 cycles, my department has operated under the assumption that Terrans are, to employ the vernacular, insane. This belief has permeated every level of our contact protocols. A ripple of amusement moved through the chamber. General Vrex, commander of the 3rd Stellar Fleet, let out a whistling laugh. We've all seen the reports, Director. They consume neurotoxic compounds for pleasure. They engage in recreational violence for entertainment. They've weaponized everything from sonic frequencies to their own microbial fauna. If that's not insanity, what is? Chak's eyes darkened to a deeper purple. That, General, is precisely the misunderstanding that will cost us everything if we proceed with either integration or conquest. Humans aren't insane. They're something the galaxy hasn't encountered in 12,000 years of recorded history. He activated his datapad, and a holographic image of Earth materialized above the chamber floor. The planet rotated slowly, blue and white and deceptively beautiful. To the assembled council, it looked like any other garden world, the kind that produced soft civilizations of philosophers and artists, species that joined the galactic community with gratitude and wonder. This is a death world, Chak stated flatly. The chamber fell silent. Even Tikal leaned forward on his throne. Impossible, interjected Science Minister Loth, her tendrils coiling with agitation. The planet shows clear markers of Class M habitability. Oxygen, nitrogen atmosphere, liquid water, moderate temperature variance. Moderate, Chak interrupted, a breach of protocol that made several council members hiss in disapproval. Forgive me, Minister, but allow me to contextualize moderate in Terran terms. He gestured and the hologram shifted, displaying a desert landscape where heat ripples distorted the air. This region experiences surface temperatures exceeding 300 Kelvin. Humans live here. They built cities here. The hologram shifted again, this time to a frozen wasteland of white and gray. Here, temperatures plunge to 220 Kelvin. Humans live here too. They research here, establish permanent installations, raise offspring. Another shift, to a churning mass of clouds and lightning. Their atmospheric patterns generate rotating wind phenomena called hurricanes, with velocities exceeding 200 kilometers per hour. These occur regularly. Humans have learned to predict them, name them, and simply endure them. Minister Loth's tendrils had gone rigid. That variation would require multiple evolutionary adaptations. Humanity has none of the specialized adaptations you're thinking of, Chak continued. No thermal regulation organs like the Vexari, no insulating fur like the Corathans, no hibernation capability like our own species. Instead, they developed something more dangerous than any biological adaptation: behavioral plasticity. He pulled up another image, a collage of human faces from across their planet. Different skin tones, facial structures, body types. They evolved not as a unified species in a stable environment, but as scattered populations facing radically different selection pressures. Desert humans developed one set of survival strategies. Arctic humans developed others. Island humans, mountain humans, jungle humans, each environment forced different solutions. Then approximately 10,000 years ago they began to reconnect. And they fought, General Vrex predicted. Endlessly, Jack confirmed. But here's what makes them dangerous. They also interbred, traded, shared, learned. They didn't homogenize, they synthesized. A human born in the Arctic can learn to thrive in the desert within months. They don't adapt genetically over generations. They adapt culturally within lifetimes and individually within days. Tikal's resonance dropped to a lower frequency, indicating deep consideration. You're describing extreme environmental adaptability. Troublesome for occupation, certainly, but hardly unprecedented. Your radiance, I've only described their planet. I haven't yet addressed their history. Chak's voice carried an edge now, something between warning and awe. In the time between their development of agriculture and their achievement of spaceflight, a span of roughly 12,000 years, they fought approximately 14,000 documented wars. The silence that followed was profound. 14,000 conflicts, Chak continued, ranging from skirmishes between city-states to planetary conflicts that consumed entire continents. They developed weapons that could exterminate their own species dozens of times over. They deployed these weapons. They survived them. And throughout this entire period of continuous warfare, they simultaneously produced art, science, philosophy, music, literature. Often their greatest cultural achievements emerged directly from their most violent periods. He pulled up a historical record, showing human cities in various states of destruction and reconstruction. This pattern repeats across every continent, every culture, every era. Destruction and creation, existing not in sequence but in parallel. They don't wait for peace to build. They build during war. This is their normal state of existence. Council member Thex, who had remained silent until now, spoke with the careful diction of someone hoping they've misunderstood. Director, you're suggesting that warfare is not an aberration in human society, but a feature? I'm suggesting, Chak replied, that humanity doesn't experience stress and chaos the way we do. We evolved on stable worlds with predictable threats. We developed stress responses designed to avoid danger, retreat, wait for equilibrium to return. Humans evolved where equilibrium never existed. Their stress response doesn't say retreat and wait. It says adapt and overcome. They don't just survive chaos. They weaponize it. He changed the display once more, this time showing a complex network diagram. This is what they call the Internet. A global information network connecting billions of individual nodes. It was created by their military to ensure communication would survive a nuclear war. When they released it for civilian use, did it create unity? No. It created an explosion of competing ideas, arguments, innovations, and chaos that somehow increased their collective innovation capacity by orders of magnitude. General Vrex's tone had lost its earlier amusement. You're saying they function better in disorder? I'm saying disorder is their natural habitat, Chak responded. The mixed Thali Empire has thrived because we value hierarchy, protocol, and stability. We are predictable, and predictability breeds efficiency. Humans are anti-predictable. Every human contains contradictions. They pursue peace through violence. They fear death yet seek thrills. They value logic yet worship randomness. They're individualistic yet impossibly social. These aren't flaws. They're the reason they're still alive. Emperor Tikal rose from the resonance throne, a gesture that commanded absolute attention. Director Chak, you have outlined a concerning profile. But I note you recommended neither integration nor conquest. What then do you propose? Chak met his emperor's gaze without flinching. Your Radiance, I propose we do something the mixed Thali Empire has never done in its 3,000-year history. He paused, letting the weight of his next words settle. I propose we approach them as equals, because if we treat them as subjects, they will resist, and if we treat them as enemies, they will teach us why their world made them the way they are. The implications hung in the air like a physical presence, an empire that had never negotiated from anywhere but strength, being advised to treat a newcomer species as peers. They're not insane, Chak said quietly. They're what happens when evolution doesn't have the luxury of creating specialists. They're what you get when the only successful strategy is to be ready for everything. They're dangerous not despite their chaos, but because of it. The anatomy of chaos the council chamber had transformed. What began as a routine strategic session now felt like a trial, where the verdict would determine the fate of an empire. Emperor Tikal remained standing, a posture that indicated the discussion was far from over. Elaborate, Director, the Emperor commanded. You claim humans weaponize chaos. I need specifics, not philosophy. Chuck nodded, anticipating this. He'd spent 7 years preparing for this moment, watching countless hours of human broadcasts, intercepting their communications, studying their literature. What he'd found had cost him sleep, a luxury his species rarely surrendered. "Let's begin with their military doctrine," Chuck said, pulling up tactical displays. "We've analyzed 300 years of human warfare. Our war algorithms can predict Korthan battle strategies with 94% accuracy. We can anticipate Vexari fleet movements at 89%. For the Xyloth Confederation, we achieve 97% predictive success." He paused, letting the numbers establish credibility. "Against human military simulations, our predictive accuracy is 31%, barely better than random chance." General Vrex's scales rippled with disbelief. "That's impossible. Tactical analysis is mathematical. Strategies follow logical progressions based on resource allocation, terrain advantages, force multiplication, all of which humans understand and routinely ignore," Chuck interrupted. "Let me show you something they call the Battle of Thermopylae." A historical recreation materialized above the chamber floor. 300 human warriors held a strategic mountain pass against an invasion force of hundreds of thousands. Tactically suicidal, they knew they would die. They went anyway. They held for 3 days, killing thousands, buying time for their civilization to prepare. This wasn't an anomaly. This is a celebrated moment in their cultural memory. They teach it to their children. He shifted the display. Here's another. The Battle of Stalingrad. A city under siege, surrounded, outnumbered, facing an army that had conquered an entire continent. Standard military doctrine says surrender or retreat. The humans fought building by building, room by room for over 5 months. They didn't retreat. They didn't surrender. They won. Minister Loth's tendrils coiled tighter. "Surely these are exceptional cases." "They have thousands of these cases," Chuck said, his voice rising. "The human military archives are filled with battles where the logical outcome didn't occur, because humans refuse to accept logic as a limitation. They don't fight the battle in front of them. They fight the battle they want to create. They call it tactical flexibility, but it's more than that. It's operational madness that somehow produces results." He pulled up a comparative analysis. "When we train soldiers, we teach doctrine. Specific responses to specific situations. When humans train soldiers, they teach something called combined arms warfare, the integration of multiple combat styles simultaneously. But more critically, they teach initiative. They expect their lowest-ranking fighters to make command-level decisions in the chaos of battle. They don't just tolerate deviation from the plan, they encourage it." General Vrex was no longer laughing. "That would create coordination nightmares." "It should," Chuck agreed. "Instead, it creates an enemy that adapts faster than we can update our tactical models. In our recent border skirmish in the Kepler corridor, we engaged a human patrol vessel. We had superior firepower, superior shields, superior tactical position. They should have retreated or been destroyed. Instead, they vented their own atmosphere to extinguish a fire, used the escaping gas as a propulsion vector to change trajectory, and fired their escape pods as kinetic projectiles while their main weapons recharged. They damaged 2 of our ships with equipment designed for survival, not combat." He let that sink in before continuing. "When we reviewed the engagement, we expected to find a decorated special forces team. It was a cargo transport crew, a logistics unit. They weren't even combat trained. But they were human, which means they were trained to improvise, to treat every tool as a potential weapon, to see limitations as opportunities." Emperor Tikal's mandibles clicked in thought. "Interesting, but military unpredictability alone doesn't justify your recommendation." "All species can be conquered with sufficient force." "Of course, Your Radiance," Chuck acknowledged. "Which brings me to their economy." The hologram shifted to display complex trade networks. Human economic systems are perhaps even more disturbing than their military. We operate on the crystalline trade standard, stable, predictable, backed by tangible resources. 17 species in this galaxy use variations of resource-backed currency. It works because it's rational. He highlighted Earth's financial networks. Humans invented something they call derivatives trading. They create financial instruments based not on goods, but on predictions of future goods, which are then traded based on predictions of those predictions. They've built markets that bet on the failure of other markets. They've created entire economic sectors based on abstract concepts like intellectual property and brand value. And somehow, this system of organized chaos generates wealth. Science Minister Loth's confusion was evident. That sounds like mass delusion. It would be, Chak replied, except that it works. Their economy has survived hundreds of crashes that should have caused civilizational collapse. Each time they restructure, adapt, and emerge differently. They don't have one economic system. They have dozens, all operating simultaneously, competing and cooperating in ways that violate every principle of rational trade theory. When one system fails, others compensate. It's economic biodiversity, and it makes them nearly impossible to destabilize through conventional means. He pulled up another display showing human cultural data. But here's what truly concerns me: their innovation rate. We've had faster-than-light travel for 800 years. Our improvements have been incremental. 3% efficiency increase here, 5% range extension there. Predictable progress along established research vectors. The display showed humanity's technological timeline. Humans achieved spaceflight 170 years ago. In that time, they've developed 17 different FTL theories, 8 of which actually work. Not variations on a theme, fundamentally different approaches to the same problem. They have competing research institutions that refuse to share data because they want to be first. This should slow them down. Instead, it accelerates them. Council member Thex leaned forward. How is that possible? Because diversity generates options, Chak explained. When we encounter a problem, we assign our best minds to solve it in the most logical way. When humans encounter a problem, thousands of independent groups attack it from different angles. Most fail, but the ones that succeed do so in ways no one predicted. They call it the marketplace of ideas, and it's infuriatingly effective. He changed the display to show human art, music, literature, a dizzying array of styles and forms. This isn't just technological. Their cultural diversity mirrors their biological adaptation. They have thousands of languages, religions, artistic traditions, philosophical frameworks. These should fragment their civilization. Instead, they create what humans call hybrid vigor. Ideas cross-pollinate. A musical tradition from one continent merges with technology from another, creating entirely new forms of expression. They don't just tolerate diversity, they weaponize it. General Vrex's voice carried a new tone, something approaching respect tinged with fear. You're describing a species that treats chaos as a resource. Precisely, Chak confirmed. And it extends to their psychology. We've intercepted their entertainment broadcasts, what they call movies, games, literature. Our psychological profiles classify 70% of their popular entertainment as simulated trauma. They create fictional scenarios of disaster, horror, invasion, apocalypse, and consume them for pleasure. They're not just surviving chaos, they're training for it recreationally. He pulled up footage of human extreme sports. They throw themselves off mountains with fabric wings. They descend into underwater caves where one wrong turn means death. They climb vertical rock faces without safety equipment. They call these activities hobbies. When we asked a human diplomat why they do this, he said, "Because it's there." As if the existence of danger is justification enough to confront it. Minister Loth's tendrils had begun to tremble. Director, you're painting a picture of a species that's fundamentally incompatible with galactic civilization. Perhaps containment is the answer. Limit their expansion, monitor their systems. We tried that, Chak said quietly. 60 years ago, the Vexari Dominion had the same idea. They established a blockade around the Sol system, believing they could contain humanity until they became civilized enough to join the galaxy. It lasted 11 months. What happened? The humans went around them, over them, through them. They established hidden colonies using sublight generation ships launched before the blockade. They developed quantum communication that couldn't be intercepted. They sent autonomous exploration probes to systems the Vexari weren't watching. When the Vexari found the colony ships, they discovered the crews had reproduced, raised children in deep space, and trained them as astronauts from birth. An entire generation born between stars because humans refused to wait. He pulled up the final documentation of the blockade. The Vexari gave up when they realized containing humanity would require containing human thought. You can blockade a planet, you can't blockade an idea. And humans spread ideas like a biological imperative. Their internet, their art, their philosophy, it leaks out. Other species find it fascinating, destabilizing, dangerous. and irresistible in equal measure. Emperor Takal descended from his throne, moving to stand before the rotating hologram of Earth. His reflection merged with the blue planet, creating an unsettling composite image. "You've made your case that they're formidable, Director," the Emperor said. "But formidable opponents have been defeated before. The Korathan Empire seemed invincible until we cracked their command structure. The Xyloth Confederation appeared unstoppable until we isolated their supply lines. Every enemy has a weakness. What is humanity's weakness?" Chak had been dreading this question because he knew his answer would sound like surrender. "Your radiance," he said slowly. "Humanity's weakness is that they don't have one, not in any conventional sense. They have vulnerabilities, they're carbon-based, they need oxygen, they can be killed. But systemically, culturally, they've evolved to have no single point of failure. Their governments are redundant. Their economies are diversified. Their knowledge is distributed. Their population is scattered. Even their decision-making is decentralized." He gestured to the hologram. "If we destroyed Earth tomorrow, humanity would survive. They're already on a dozen worlds, hundreds of stations, thousands of ships. If we eliminated their leadership, new leaders would emerge within hours. They have succession protocols built on top of succession protocols. If we crashed their economy, they'd barter, trade, improvise until they rebuilt it. If we destroyed their military, their civilians would arm themselves. They don't have a center to strike because they evolved without the luxury of centralization." The chamber was silent as the implications crystallized. "They're not insane," Chak repeated. "They're what survival looks like when the universe doesn't offer easy options. They're what happens when a species spends millions of years being traumatized by their own planet and decides the appropriate response is to become more dangerous than anything the planet can throw at them." The Predator's reflection. Emperor Takal stood motionless before the hologram of Earth, his reflection merging with the planet's swirling clouds. The council chamber had fallen into a silence so profound that the bioluminescent crystals overhead seemed to pulse in rhythm with the collective tension. Finally, he spoke. "Director Chak, you've spent 7 years studying humanity. In all that time, have you identified what they want? Every species wants something. Power, security, resources, territory. What drives them?" Chak's response came without hesitation. "Everything, Your Radiance. They want everything." The Emperor's mandibles spread in what might have been confusion or concern. "Clarify." "Humans don't have a unified goal because they don't think collectively," Chak explained, pulling up sociological data. "A single human city can contain individuals who want peace, war, exploration, isolation, tradition, revolution, all simultaneously. Their civilizations don't move in one direction. They move in all directions at once, and somehow the vector sum produces progress." He highlighted communication intercepts from human networks. "We've monitored their public discourse. At any given moment, humans are arguing about everything: politics, ethics, science, art, the nature of reality itself. They never reach consensus. They've been debating the same fundamental questions for thousands of years. What is justice? What is freedom? What is truth? And they're no closer to agreement than when they started." Council member Thex's confusion was evident. "How do they function without consensus?" "That's what we've been misunderstanding," Chak said. "They don't need consensus to function. They need disagreement. Conflict generates options. When we face a decision, we deliberate until we reach agreement. Then we act. When humans face a decision, they fragment into factions, each pursuing different solutions simultaneously. Most fail, but the ones that succeed pull the rest forward." He pulled up historical examples. When they developed space travel, it wasn't a unified effort. Competing nations raced each other to achieve it first. When they created their internet, it wasn't planned. Dozens of incompatible networks eventually merged through sheer necessity. When they face existential threats, they don't unite under one banner. They attack the problem from every angle available. It's chaotic, wasteful, and impossibly effective. General Vrex, who had been quietly processing everything, finally spoke. "Director, you've described their adaptability, their resilience, their innovation, but you haven't addressed the fundamental question." He paused, his scales darkening. "Can we defeat them?" The question hung in the air like a blade. Chak met the general's gaze. "In open warfare, perhaps. We have more ships, more territory, more resources. We could win battles. We might even win a war. He paused, and his next words carried the weight of prophecy. But we couldn't win the peace. Explain, the Emperor commanded. Occupation requires compliance, Jack said. Every species we've integrated into the Empire has eventually accepted their place because they value stability over resistance. The cost-benefit analysis favors cooperation, but humans don't calculate cost-benefit the same way we do. They factor in intangibles we don't even have words for. Pride, spite, principles, legacy. They'll pay costs we consider irrational for outcomes they consider sacred. He displayed historical data from Earth. This is a human island nation called Britain. For 5 years, they fought an enemy that had conquered an entire continent. They were bombed nightly. Their cities burned. Their people died by the thousands. Logic said surrender. They refused, not because they thought they could win alone, but because surrender was unacceptable. They have a phrase, we shall never surrender. It's not strategy, it's identity. Another display. This is a resistance movement in occupied territory. Civilians, farmers, teachers, shopkeepers, conducting guerrilla warfare against a military occupation. They knew most of them would die. They fought anyway. Humans have dozens of these examples, hundreds. When occupying human territory, the occupiers don't just fight soldiers, they fight the entire population, including children who throw rocks at armed troops because defiance is more important than survival. Minister Loth's voice trembled. Surely they can be reasoned with. Show them that cooperation benefits everyone. We tried, Chak interrupted gently. The Karathan hegemony attempted peaceful integration 40 years ago. They offered technology, resources, cultural exchange, everything we typically use for diplomatic assimilation. The humans accepted the gifts, studied the technology, learned everything they could, and then politely declined membership. When the Korathans pressed harder, the humans began asking uncomfortable questions. What questions? Questions about Korathan labor practices, resource distribution, individual rights. The humans have this concept they call human rights, except they don't just apply it to humans. They decided the Karathan treatment of their client species violated these principles. Suddenly, the species being assimilated was judging the Empire doing the assimilating. The Korathans withdrew before the humans could destabilize their entire social structure. Emperor Tikal's resonance dropped to the lowest frequency, a sign of deep contemplation that usually preceded momentous decisions. You paint a picture of an unstoppable species. But nothing is unstoppable, Director. Even humans must have limits. They do, Your Radiance, Chak acknowledged. But their limits are different from ours. We stop when the cost exceeds the benefit. Humans stop when they choose to stop, and the factors influencing that choice are not purely rational. He pulled up psychological profiles. We've analyzed human decision-making under stress. Our models predicted they would behave like other species, become more conservative, more risk-averse, more focused on survival. Instead, stress makes them creative. Desperation makes them innovative. The closer they come to defeat, the more dangerous they become. That's biologically contradictory, Science Minister Loth protested. It's evolutionarily optimal for a death world species, Chak countered. When your planet is constantly trying to kill you, the survivors aren't the ones who played it safe. They're the ones who tried something new. Humans have inherited millions of years of genetic memory that says, when things get bad, get creative. When things get desperate, get aggressive. When all options are exhausted, invent new options. He changed the display to show human space vessels. Look at their ships. Every other species in the galaxy designed ships for efficiency, specialization. Scout ships, cargo ships, warships, each optimized for its role. Humans design ships that can do everything. A human cargo vessel has weapons. Their exploration ships carry military-grade shields. Even their civilian transports have emergency combat protocols. They don't build for the mission they have. They build for the mission they might need. General Vrek studied the schematics. That's inefficient. Jack of all trades, master of none. Until the unexpected happens, Chak said. Then they're the only ones prepared. That cargo vessel I mentioned earlier, the one that damaged our ships with escape pods, it survived because it wasn't optimized. Optimization creates efficiency but eliminates options. Humans choose options over efficiency every time. He pulled up one final display, a montage of human faces, diverse in every way imaginable. Your Radiance Honored Council, I've spent 7 years trying to find humanity's weakness. I've found something else instead. I've found why every species that has seriously considered confronting humanity has eventually backed down. The chamber leaned forward collectively. It's not because humans are unbeatable, Jack continued. It's because beating them doesn't end the problem. It creates a new one. A conquered human population doesn't submit. It metastasizes. Humans under occupation don't lose hope. They cultivate grievance. And human grievance, passed down through generations, becomes something more powerful than any weapon we possess. It becomes mythology. He gestured to Earth again. They have stories spanning thousands of years about underdogs defeating empires, slaves overthrowing masters, rebels toppling kingdoms. These aren't just entertainment, they're instruction manuals. Every human child grows up hearing stories about how the weak defeated the strong through cunning, courage, and refusal to surrender. These stories shape their psychology. They don't fear defeat because their entire cultural narrative says defeat is temporary and vengeance is patient. Emperor Tikal's voice carried a new tone, something that might have been respect or might have been fear. So your recommendation is surrender? The mixed Thali Empire, which has stood for 3,000 years, should bow to a species that achieved spaceflight less than 2 centuries ago? No, Your Radiance, Chak said firmly. I recommend something far more difficult. I recommend we recognize reality. Humans aren't our subjects in waiting. They're not our enemies to be defeated. They're our equals who don't know it yet, which makes them more dangerous than if they were deliberately hostile. He deactivated the hologram, and Earth vanished, leaving only the Council in the dim light. The galaxy has operated on certain assumptions for 12 millennia. Stable worlds produce stable species. Stability creates hierarchy. Hierarchy enables empire. These assumptions have been true for every species we've encountered. His voice dropped. Until humans. They evolved where stability was death. They created civilization not despite chaos but because of it. They built technology not to escape their world, but to conquer it. And now they're here in our galaxy, bringing their death world philosophy with them. What philosophy is that? Council member Thex asked quietly. That nothing is impossible, Chak replied. That any challenge can be overcome with sufficient creativity and sacrifice. That defeat is temporary and limits our suggestions. That the universe doesn't care about fairness, so neither should they. It's not a philosophy any stable world species could adopt. It would seem like madness. But for them, it's simply truth. Emperor Tikal returned to his throne but didn't sit. Instead, he stood beside it, looking down at his council. Director Chak, I asked what you recommend. You've explained what humans are. Now tell me what we should do. Chak straightened, knowing this moment would define his career and possibly his species' future. We should approach the Terran Alliance as partners, not as potential subjects or future threats, but as equals. We should propose mutual defense pacts, technology exchanges, cultural programs. We should integrate them into the galactic community, not through dominance but through collaboration. And if they refuse? General Vrex asked. They won't, Chak said with certainty. Humans are curious to a fault. They'll want to learn everything about us, experience everything we can offer. They'll bring their chaos into our order, and it will be uncomfortable. They'll question our traditions, challenge our assumptions, and refuse to simply accept things because that's how they've always been done. He paused, then continued. But they'll also bring innovation we can't achieve alone. They'll approach our problems from angles we'd never consider. They'll create hybrid solutions that merge their adaptability with our stability. And most importantly, if we make them partners now, we gain allies who will never abandon us in crisis because humans don't know how. Science Minister Loth's tendrils finally relaxed slightly. You're certain of this? I'm certain that we have 2 paths, Chak replied. We can treat them as threats and spend the next 1,000 years in escalating conflict with a species that treats conflict as a natural state. Or we can treat them as the anomaly they are, Basiwam civilization that somehow turned Death World survival instincts into a coherent culture, and learn from them while they learn from us. Emperor Tikal's mandibles clicked in a complex pattern that signaled a decision forming. You believe they'll make us stronger. I believe they'll make us different, Your Radiance, Chak corrected. Whether that's stronger depends on our willingness to adapt, which is ironic, because adaptation is humanity's specialty. If we can learn even a fraction of their flexibility while maintaining our stability, the galaxy will never see anything like the partnership we could become. He gestured to where Earth's hologram had been. They're not insane. They're not even dangerous in the way we initially thought. They're what happens when evolution creates survivors instead of specialists. They're what we might have become if our world had been less forgiving. And now that they're here, spreading through the galaxy with their chaos and creativity and impossible optimism, we have a choice. Which is, grow with them, or be left behind wondering how we were outpaced by a species that still argues about everything, agrees on nothing, and somehow keeps moving forward anyway. The council chamber fell silent once more. Emperor Takal looked at each council member in turn, reading the fear, the doubt, the curiosity, and slowly growing acceptance in their expressions. Finally, he spoke, his voice carrying the harmonic resonance of imperial decree. We will extend a formal invitation to the Terran Alliance for a diplomatic summit. We will negotiate as equals, and we will discover whether the mixed Thali Empire is adaptable enough to survive partnership with a species that apparently evolved to weaponize unpredictability. He turned to Chak. Director, you will lead our delegation. If humans are as fascinating and dangerous as you claim, I want someone who understands them representing our interests. Chak bowed, feeling both honored and terrified. Your Radiance, there's one more thing you should know about humans before we begin negotiations. What's that? They have a saying, keep your friends close and your enemies closer. But they have another saying that's more relevant. Chak's eyes gleamed with something between admiration and dread. They say, if you can't beat them, join them. We should be aware that while we're trying to make them our partners, they're probably already planning how to make us their allies. The difference is subtle but significant. General Vrex actually laughed, a genuine sound of appreciation. So we're entering negotiations with a species that's already thinking 3 moves ahead. General, Chak replied. They're always thinking 3 moves ahead. That's what surviving on Earth taught them. The question isn't whether they're strategizing, it's whether we're clever enough to keep up. Emperor Takal's mandibles spread in what his species used as a smile. Then I suggest we learn quickly. After all, if humans can adapt to any environment, surely the mixed Thali Empire can adapt to one chaotic species. With respect, your Radiance, Chak said quietly. I don't think we're adapting to them. I think we're about to discover that the galaxy has been too stable for too long. Humans aren't joining our galactic community. They're introducing us to theirs. One where nothing is permanent, everything is negotiable, and the only constant is change. He looked at each council member. We thought they were insane because they don't act like us. We thought they were dangerous because they're unpredictable. But the truth is simpler and more profound. They're not insane. They're not dangerous. They're just human. And being human means carrying the trauma and triumph of a death world into every interaction, every decision, every moment. And that makes them what, exactly? Minister Loth asked. Chak's answer was simple, final, and absolutely certain. Survivors. The kind who don't just endure the storm. They learn to dance in it. And now they're inviting the rest of us to join them. The only question is whether we're brave enough to try.